All right, Greg. We'll get restarted here now that I think I have my audio issues. So, hello, everyone. We're having some problems getting started in the recording this morning, but we have a great episode for you. And so, big picture topic that we're talking about is this anything can happen and how it's a myth, as far as I'm concerned. And what I mean by that is, we talk about different interactions from humans and people make observations like, well, they could do anything or anything could occur or, we don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times it just simply isn't true. Now, if you're trying
Right.
to predict, some black swan event, some major thing, that's really hard to do, right? And you see that in like, economics or, finance, different areas like that, where you're trying to someone capitalizes on something that's a rare occurrence and they were like the only person that saw it coming,
Ever.
and it's so rare. I mean, we're not talking about these things. We're talking about basic human interactions, what you can predict, what's likely, what's unlikely, what's known versus unknown kind of thing. And the idea is when you have this approach, my biggest problem with people saying, well, anything could happen, the problem with that is that it increases the level of uncertainty, especially in anything like a high risk situation or
Granted.
some extreme situation. And therefore, it makes it harder to anticipate likely outcomes. Meaning, if I go in and I'm going up to contact someone, Greg, and I'm going, oh man, anything can happen, I'm not sure. One, it increases the uncertainty level, it increases the
Yep.
anxiety level, and my
Cognitive
brain's all
load.
over the place.
Exactly.
So it increases my cognitive load. And
Yep.
so this is the big thing that we talk about with our behavioral approaches with HBPRNA and how we leverage it to reduce the uncertainty,
Yep.
right? So I don't want to increase it. I want to reduce what's uncertain. I want to get rid of unknowns. I want to focus on the things that matter. So that's what we do and what we train people how to do. But there's a lot that goes into it, and I want to hit on some of the kind of big picture topics that
Yeah.
we don't typically explicitly get into, but that's kind of what we can do here on the podcast versus covering this stuff in course or like in a training course or something like that. But we use things like game theory and probability theory and Bayes' theorem, and we'll
Yep.
define what all that means for everyone, and because we stick to the science and we use it in a manner, well, what I think for which it was intended, right? And an
Yeah.
actual use case, in a sense that I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a high level expert in those areas, but I know them well enough to use them in what we do, right? And I
Yeah.
can point back to them and saying this is where this comes from. So there's a lot we're going to get into in there, but I really want to. The big thing is really sort of debunking this myth, this idea that, well, anything could happen or you don't know that. It's like, well, yeah, no, you do know that, and then
Right.
get into things, we get into human interactions sort of as like using games as an analogy, and we'll talk
Yep.
about that, not just game theory but games and how they reflect life, and then how thinking in a certain manner, in what we're talking about today, can help your ability to help your predictive analysis abilities, right?
Yeah.
So and when we're getting into everything I just brought up, that anything can happen, sometimes knowing what you might not know what's going to happen next, but knowing what isn't going to happen or what's unlikely is helpful. Meaning going like, well, I know none of this can happen over here, so I really only have to focus on these 5 things instead of these
Yep.
50 things. So
Yep.
that's that reduction in cognitive load. That's a reduction in uncertainty that you're talking about. And now I can account for those. So I'm kind of talking about this big picture, but let's start with, I think we should start with games, Greg, if that sounds
No,
good.
so
You wanna
let's
comment on it
yeah,
first. Yeah.
let's talk about what you just talked about first, because that's a great intro. And so this is my continued argument for improving law enforcement training and simulations, because what happens is we're focused on motor learning and motor control and speed,
Yeah.
all of these elements that are not going to affect your decision making when the time comes. And I'll give you an example of that. You just talked about reducing uncertainty. So I saw a guy yesterday on a LinkedIn post that was drawing from a paddle holster that was appendix carry, fired all the rounds safely and quickly, and it was in the 2-second range that he emptied his mag into a target. Okay, so do me a favor. When will that reduce uncertainty? That will reduce uncertainty at that one time in that person's life where the rotor hits the spark and the oxygen hits the fuel, and it's a thing where you have to outdraw an opponent and fire all the rounds in your weapon. I was a cop for 30 years. That never happened to me. Now, how many cops on the street has that happened to? And the idea is that you think you're doing great training. And I'm great with that type of training. But look at the Olympics. The Olympics is full of people that specialize in one thing for their entire life, for the likelihood that that's going to come around. And that's not how things work. And that's why I just want to throw that on the table. And I want to say world according to Greg.
That's actually
go ahead.
A great way to, because we're using this game's theory and games as an analogy, but that's actually a really, really important distinction. And we'll get into how we define what games are. But
exactly,
that's a very... these analogies where it comes from sports performance to now we're going to talk and carry that over in like military or law enforcement or high risk situations. And it does not translate. It just doesn't.
It can't translate because it's not the same. What you've done is you've taken Monopoly and you've taken checkers and you're reading me the directions to play Monopoly and handing me a checkers board. It can't converge, you know? So,
because what you talked about, it's the scope. The scope is so limited in a 100-meter dash. Like that's it. Like there's no, you get to,
and there's a ton going on. Don't get me wrong. It's not that it's not a complicated skill, but it's nowhere near as infinite as the potentials that could happen in something like human resources or police work or, being a teacher. So my additional argument for improving law enforcement is that you have to understand the general limitations of a problem limit the potential solutions. And what I mean by that is simply the probability theory. And most people say, well, probability theory, mathematics, this and that and the other. Well, I'll tell you this. Discussing the likelihood of everyday events, like the chance of rain, or the probability of winning a game. Make these huge mathematical theories and principles more intuitive for the students to grasp. And that's why when we're doing like a briefing, you always see me use a slide about snow and lightning and fog. And the reason I do that is if you can predict them, you can predict likely outcomes, right? So what I'm trying to do is instead of making the problem bigger, I'm trying to make the outcomes more clear so you can better understand what probability means. So we talk about pattern recognition and analysis. That means we predict likelihood. And teaching tools, when you give a practical example like how this is going to work makes more sense to a person. I'll give you an example. So, I go shopping every week and I go shopping at the same time, the same store. There's tens of thousands of choices that I could make in that store, but somehow I navigate every aisle, take the items that I want, and I come back. So even though there seems to be an infinite amount of choices, there's literally a finite number of items that I select from, and my predisposition guides me that way. Now, you talked about games. So what's the difference in games? So the elements of a game are that you have decision makers, the players. Okay, then you have their actions, so the choices that are available to them. And then you have the information or knowledge that they go in with or that they learn while they're playing the game based on their opponent. That's exactly what you're doing at the grocery store. But there's not an unlimited amount of choices. There's a finite number, even though it's a big number, Brian. And so when we talk about that, why is that important? And that's just touching on games and game theory very, very briefly because we're going to discuss it. But what I mean by that is it seems overwhelming, yet I navigate it every week. Law enforcement, with all the choices and the possibilities that could come up when you bail out of that car, from dispatch, from the RP, from the scene and the location and the weather and all those other stuff, seems unmanageable. It seems infinite. It seems like anything can happen. But at the end of the day, anything can't happen. As a matter of fact, a great thing about probability theory, and I don't want to get deep into math, but it's 0 or it's 1. It's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Now, you know how many variations there are between that 0 and that 1? But guess what? They're not infinite. They're finite. Look, physics limits the number of things that can happen.
Yes? Unless you want to get into the mathematical argument about infinity and our grasp of it. And
right.
There's a whole
but
bunch
how
of
many
between 0 and 1?
How many theoretical arguments? Right. No, I love that. But how many theoretical arguments can be made for that on the scene with an opponent? He's going to have a weapon. Well, a weapon can vary. He's going to be aggressive, or he's going to be passive aggressive, or he's not going to be aggressive. He's going to be communicative, or he's not going to be. When you start branching that, it's just like Wing Chun, or just like martial arts when you're practicing a kata or doing sparring. Okay. The person doesn't come in and drop a smoke bomb and then stab you with the sai and go, hey, there you go. Well, because that would be outside of the outside of the realm of the possibilities that you're going to do on the mat at that time in the dojo, right? So training prepares us for as many of those contingencies as possible. and it's up to us to choose which ones we want to do. So instead of choosing the 1-inch punch, you and I have chosen to spend our entire life on cognition, on thinking and outthinking a cunning opponent. And that's literally what you're talking about, is the difference between coming in with the mindset, and I hate mindsets, coming in with the mindset and saying anything can happen, right?
Yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure. So you started with games, and you gave some of the core elements of the games and kind of defined them about, like, the players, there's rules, there's information, there's outcomes. So can you, because games are a great analogy, but far more significant than we think, in a sense. So can you give some,
I would agree.
what we mean by like the historical significance and what we mean by games?
So Shelley and I, just before Shelley left this morning, our CEO, I said, hey, I'm going to be talking about games today. And she reminded me that 2007, 3rd Marine Kaneohe Bay, she said, that's the first group of Marines you talked about with games. So bring that up. And I said, okay, I'll bring that up. Shout out back to the day, Brian. But if you recall that class, when we walked in, we said that, okay, every culture on the planet has games. And then people paused for a minute and they started thinking about it, because we had the Marines are one of the most culturally diverse fighting organizations on the face of the planet, right? Okay, I learned the words I needed in Tagalog from a Marine, right? So games are also probably, music is up there too, one of the oldest forms of human social interaction, okay? Games are a way to teach and pass on knowledge, and a way to store knowledge. That game on the shelf stores that knowledge, Brian, just like a book at the library. And then when we look at it, ancient games, the oldest games that we know about, what did they teach? They taught farming and hunting and survival skills and social intercourse, how you meet other people, how you're supposed to act. And they helped develop this social and emotional and physical and cognitive skills. And so when we start talking about limiting stuff, okay, no matter how diverse games are, they all have a winner, a loser, or a draw. They all have a set of rules that the people follow. And no game is infinite. So somebody right now that's listening is going to go, well, there's no rules in a knife fight. Fuck yes, there are. You're just, you know what? You went to the wrong dojo, because there's a whole bunch of rules in that,
Gravity still applies.
Physics still applies, distance, time. So when you make comments like that, what you're doing is you're showing your naivete, and that's why we're still not happy with the state. Look, we partner with a whole bunch of companies, and when we see the state of training in some places, we object to certain things that are still missing. Why? Because our locus of control is to this thing that's right in front of us, and then we forget or absent thinking, because it's harder. It's harder. It's more obtuse, Brian.
Your locus of control, it goes back to, actually, I was thinking of that with the mindset discussion we had this morning before we got on here. But what you're talking about is what humans think that they can control. So if anyone's never heard the term locus of control, it's a psychological term. But the idea, some people have very little, like they think everything in the environment, and it's all external forces that plan out their life, or everything. I'm set up for failure, and this. And people have a great internal locus of control. Really understand that, like, no, I can change my life. I control the outcomes of my situation. So that's what you mean by that. But you brought up some great points about games, because games are throughout history, every culture has played different types of games, right? Games of whatever, chance, skill, physical skill, mental skill, whatever. Exactly. Right? And with that, because they're used as, like you said, a teaching point. They're a model. They're a model for human interaction. So, it's better if we just go do the 3-day long Buzkashi tournament, rather than warring with one another and fighting over everything. It's better
because there's always an end state, Brian. There's always an ultimate goal in games. You're exactly right. Spot on.
So, because it's when people go, I don't understand, like, people get so intense, or how can you get so into football or soccer, that you're gonna be like, this is an extension of the values of your life. And yes, some people take that too far. They let that sort of primitive reaction take over, where they're all in on the game, and they're gonna, you go to, like, South America, where I remember it was like the goalie for one of the teams was murdered, after he let up a goal where they the game.
That happens often.
All the time. And you're going, like, how does it get to that? This is insane. You're such a fan. It's like, no, like, this is a very primitive extension of the model of human experience, and that person was so into that. Now, they went too far with it, obviously, but
of course,
but it's not it's not a large, gap. It's not a big bridge to cross there. You
Right.
get what I'm
You
saying?
wouldn't
Because
be surprised if you read that in an article. You
not at
wouldn't
all.
be surprised if you heard that. And remember, look, shout out to Milo, because Milo was the first company to understand Hoberman and embrace it. And people are
Yeah.
now coming around to thinking what's going
Yeah.
on with it. Because we, meaning Arcadia Cognerati, Brian and I and our partners, we promote cognitive development in classrooms and in AI and in virtual by role playing and problem solving and logical thinking. We value creativity. We force you to play it
And
just like in a game. And in class, we play those games. We involve strategy and planning, and we
yeah,
encourage critical thinking
that's
and decision making. We force them to recognize patterns and sequences so they understand the cues so they can solve for X before they see X. And that's the difference. We're not seeing that in games now.
no.
In
Well,
AI and virtual.
that's what training is. Training is a game. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's what I just said. That's what I meant.
It's a
Like,
protracted game. Yes.
you're modeling. You're in simulating a likely future event, and
Yes.
you're allowing yourself that mental rehearsal. So you're playing a game because you're going to get to the championship maybe one day, or you're going to get tested on it someday, or there's going to be an opponent that's going to challenge you in said
Yep.
game. And so game theory, I'll give you kind of like a quick definition of
Sure.
game theory, Greg, and we'll talk about it, because it's important to and real quick, not getting into this to try to be like, oh, look how much shit I know, because that's not important.
That's not
it's
what
how
this
you
is
use it.
about.
But it's about naming these things, because when we get into probability theory, game theory, and especially Bayes' theorem, like
Yep.
these are things you actually do unconsciously. These are
Every
already
day.
things
Every
that
day
you
of
do
your life.
every single day. So
Yep.
if I can get some recognition and understanding of some of the elements of it, it can help me going forward. We'll get to that later, but I just I don't want to come across as like,
No.
oh, you guys just talking about some shit that doesn't matter. It's like these are things that you do. So
Yes.
game theory is sort of a branch of mathematics and economics, studies strategic interactions between decision makers or the players in the game. So
Yep.
what it is, it's a framework for anticipating the actions of others and making
Yep.
informed decisions based on potential choices available to all the parties involved. So at its core, game theory helps us understand situations where the outcome for each participant depends not only on their decisions, but the decisions of others. So the idea, it's a little
Yep.
bit more chaotic in a sense, or it allows for more contributing factors than just say like a one-on-one, like your checkers game, right?
Yep.
Is nowhere near as complex as chess. You know what I'm saying? So it's just a little bit different. So game theory really kind of can take that into account. And the same
Yep.
thing, you got the players and their strategies and information, and it, just like we talk about in games. But I just want to get that out there.
No.
Greg, and
So
allow you to discuss the so what behind it, really.
Right. So the so what behind that, and it was a profound statement. And this isn't about our intellectual acumen; it's about yours, the one that's listening to us. And so, if the outcomes depend on the player and the actions of each participant, then it's exactly like police work, because you're a player in a game and you choose your action or your strategy, and you have to take into account the choices of others. Now, they may play their role first, and then you have to respond to it. So why is that any different? So game theory is a great way, and games are a great way to talk about that. So people will say, well, yeah, but on the mat. Yeah, okay, so every game that has strength or coordination or endurance does the same thing. And it's just as good for you cognitively, and it forces you to do these things and requires manual dexterity and assist in your fine motor skills. So if you can find it in the world, you can find it in a game. You know what games do? Games evolve, Brian. And what does that mean? Games change as society changes. And that means that as players get better, the paint and the amount of time you can spend in it changes, right? Yep. And there's a smaller goal, and the goalie, has a smaller area that he has to defend. So they make it more complex by adding these things to it, which is great, which defines evolution. Yeah,
the NFL right now, they just big changes this season for some of the kickoffs and some basically they changed some of the rules, and it's for safety issues, because now people are bigger, stronger, and faster than they were 100 years ago when those rules came up with, and they're going like, this is extremely dangerous now. So it had to evolve. No,
the Olympics have changed. things are added to the Olympics, things are taken away from the Olympics. And guess what? Just like in class, we're forcing them to challenge their memory. And then we have them perform when their concentration is challenged. And we force that in the class and in the training and in the practical application scenarios. And then we add different temporal elements to change the level of stress, just like in real life, okay? And you go, oh, well, every game does it. Well, Jeopardy does it on TV. But you know what? The outcomes aren't that somebody dies. I've yet to see him take a 2-pound sledge and the person that comes in third beat him to death on stage. The idea is that the consequences and outcomes are virtually interchangeable in life. Within a game, there's losers. The difference is that the loser doesn't die. Okay, we get that. But that's how you have to think. And the problem with the mindset, don't get me started, but a mindset's powerful and it creates, I know, I always start it. The mindsets create realities and shape your thoughts and behaviors in very important ways. But the problem is they also create blind spots and they fuel biased thinking. And when left unchecked, they're harder to change because now it becomes a part of your behavior and your mindset starts to remain even though you're consciously aware of other factors. And that's when it becomes an inhibiting factor. So if you start thinking of just the science, here's the number of reactions that might happen. Here's the finite number of things that could happen. I'm going to play this in a game because I understand game theory and I understand that there's finite constraints. There may be tens of thousands of possibilities, but guess what? That's still finite, and it's a large set. But I can rehearse one of two ways. I can rehearse 10,000 different moves in karate, or I can understand anatomy. I can go 2,500 punches with my right hand, or I can understand physiology. And that's the difference. The difference is that I can take a look at our training, and our training is training us for every eventuality by improving our cognitive acumen and improving our ability to assume what might happen next and create an ML and an MD code.
And that's the idea of it is what obviously we want to get people better at, predicting behavior. So you need some sort of tools to use this. And these what we're talking about today are the foundational elements of the tools that we use, right? And we go, okay, knowing these things about science and math, right? Yeah. This is what's sort of known. So then how do we use them? Now you can use those sort of different tools, right? So that's the idea, and that's where you have to come in with something. I can't stand in there with the calculator, you know what I mean, in a situation, Greg, and figure out, what's
what training is for. So training helps me. Exactly. But training helps me understand that a calculator and a slide rule are amazing tools that I can have at my disposal, but they're not going to make the decision for me. It's still up to me to make the decision and to choose what the ultimate eventualities are of a situation. And that's why when we do training, Brian, it doesn't matter if it's raining or if it's snowing or if there's a tornadic situation that's going on. I'm moving my location.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't really matter about all those other factors because those factors are going to occur in real life too. Right. And that's the amazing thing is that a simulator can do so much. And we're not using it to its capability many times, right? Because practical examples, simulations, experiments, they're very effective because that allows a student to see that there's randomness that's surrounding them, chaos, right? Okay, but that certain patterns emerge no matter how chaotic a situation is, and that's the magic.
And I didn't really want to get into the randomness yet on this episode because there is another one, but it's an important thing to bring up as we're talking about all this and probability and what we'll get into next with Bayes' theorem. But the idea, there's a lot of randomness in the world, and because humans are primed for pattern recognition and we want to put things together and understand it, and we don't want surprises, we don't want uncertainty. We'll often attribute value to things that really are insignificant and completely random because there is a ton of randomness in the world. And so we can sort of get that can cloud our judgment, which is why I have to be able to account for that. But, the big, again, the so what on that game theory and what we're talking about is really just balancing those knowns and unknowns, right? And
Yep.
we'll define what that means. But that this is the predicting behavior, understanding interactions as a game allows me to model that in a number of different ways. It allows me
Exactly.
to actually have these conversations. And because everyone does the what if scenarios, or we'll do, people call them TDG sometimes, the tactical decision games, or
Yep.
yeah, I'm going to give you a set of circumstances and a set of constraints, and you tell me, and we're just going to walk through on a whiteboard. Okay, then I'll allocate these resources here. Then we can do this. Okay, well, what if then this occurs? Okay, so these are all great things. Those are actually far more powerful than they're
Yep.
given credit for, because a lot of times they're just not set up correctly. So because I have to understand, you know what's the likelihood of these different situations occurring. And because I remember even a few years back, even we're still running some tactical training, and it was a big ending exercise. And this team, the couple of teams that were going through it, were doing an absolutely phenomenal job, and like
Right.
beyond what we thought, like surprised us during this final exercise. And we were like, holy crap, they are killing it. And they had great comms, they had everything set up, and they were task organized, and they were doing so well, and it's a great plan, right? So then what do we have to do? We're just like, all right, well, let's just see how far this goes. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
we obviously started coming up with ridiculous stuff and give them all these problems, to the point where they're like yelling and getting frustrated. And then at the end, when we went to do the debrief, they thought that they had failed. And I had to start off with like, all right, guys, that was the best team we've ever seen come through here. And
Wow.
they're like confused. They're like, what do you mean? Like guys, like we were making stuff up at the end. Like we had enough time and enough to do it. So we just said like, Jesus, how far can these guys go? Because they did it so well. But the idea is like, that we get that wrong sometimes when we're coming up with a what if game. So
Yep.
this is trying to help that sort of what if game to keep it within the realms of the possible, and
Yep.
then that's you're going to get a lot more value out of it. And
So what you
Sorry,
did
go
there
ahead.
too? No. Just to add to that, what you did there, everything is evidence based, just like absolutely
It's hot out
overused
today.
term, right? But the
I have
idea
evidence to
is
support that.
we do, and I can see it and feel it and taste it. Okay, but the idea is that what you did is you were conducting an experiment.
Yes.
So what you did is the experiment yielded results, and you can lift and shift fire based on those results. So it's not how much faster that you can get through the scenario, or how quickly you can win. It's what you learned from
Yes.
that win or loss, what you
Yes.
learned from
The
that
outcome.
tie game, what you learned from playing against this opponent rather than another opponent. And if you can pay that knowledge forward, that's the key. That look, what's Bayes' theorem tell us? And I know you're going to
Yeah.
get into Bayes, but
No, we
let's
go
do
ahead
a
and
real
we
quick.
just jump into
A
it. Yeah.
street definition of Bayes is simply this. Okay, you have to update your probabilities based on new and incoming information. And if you're not constantly doing that, because we have certain assumptions, Brian, then all of a sudden we're in a situation. Dispatch told us this. We get out of the car. Yeah, there is in fact an argument that's going on. And you know what? The guy that we're talking to that we think is the RP, he's the guy that's killing everybody in the scenario. Okay, or whatever real life situation we're facing. So we have to update that, and we have to update that quickly,
Yeah.
because as that prediction or as that information changes, your prediction of likely outcomes change. And if you can't do that, and people go, well, isn't that like John Boyd Zoodle? That's like every critical thinker that's ever lived.
Yeah.
Ugluck,
Ever lived.
when he came out of the cave with a wood sap, he had the same realization. If I don't update, then what's going to happen is I'm going to continue to stay on the gas coming into the turn. I'm going to overrun my headlights, and guess what? I'm going to crash. So Bayes and Bayesian thinking has always been a root of Greg's experience. Hate to talk about myself in third person, but look, I'll tell you how profound it is. You and I met when you were coming in and out of combat zones, and you were part of a training evolution that I was doing, and you go, this guy's full of shit, until you started trying some of these, and then you found out, wait a minute, it makes
Yeah.
me faster, smarter, harder to kill. So it's not about me. I just happen to be the guy that introduced you to the right book in the library. That's what this is about, Brian. What I think our primary job is to create a legacy of opening eyes on people that didn't
Yeah.
see it that way before, handing out those flashlights so they can search the box instead of going
Yeah.
outside of the
And
box.
in all fairness, my reaction was actually, oh my God, this guy's fucking hilarious, and
Okay.
he's completely full of shit. But he
So the
seems fun.
2-point standard that you had.
Like it was like, oh, okay, like hey, he's a bullshitter. I got plenty of buddies like this. I've met people like this before. And then I was like, oh, wait
Right.
a minute, hang on, there's something going on here. And
Right.
to kind of to further define, I guess, or talk about because we brought up Bayes' theorem, and this is another great example of something you unconsciously use every single day of your life, right? You're always doing that in most areas, and actually,
If you're going to survive, you are. Yeah.
well, yeah, I came across a good one where because Bayes' theorem we're talking about, hey, you have this prior belief, then you get some new evidence, then you have an updated belief, and there's a million different studies like this, and I've used ones before in class where they'll give someone some information, or they'll say find out what everyone's beliefs are, and usually in something that's a very like. Politics are a great one because a lot of people are very set in their ways and how they look at certain things. So they'll take a political issue and then find out which side of it you're on, and then they'll force you like, hey, do like a 500-word essay on the opposing viewpoint. And then all of a sudden, when they have to do all that work, they kind of go, their initial viewpoint was like, oh man, like I guess I wasn't taking into account all of these other things. And even to the point where the one from today was, I'll put it in there, it was an interesting one, because they use a great example about our prior beliefs and the different kind of how sometimes we are overconfident when we're wrong, or sometimes not confident in the things that we do know. And that's the two sides of the coin that we're talking about right here.
Yep.
Meaning
exactly.
We're going, this is a lot more complex. There's a lot behind this. And someone's listening going, man, you're talking about all these mathematical stuff. I don't understand this. Or what are you getting at? It's like, no. You actually do know this. You actually use this, so you can get better at how you use it in new, novel circumstances. And so this one was they use a great example is, you walk up to someone and you go, hey, do you know how a toilet works? And they're like, yeah. And then they go, well, can you explain it to me? And they're like, well, I just kind of push the handle and it flushes. Actually, I don't know how a toilet works, right? So we have this. Yeah, I think I understand. The cell phone is a great one now, like your iPhone. Do you know how many people have I met can actually explain how an iPhone or cell phone works? I mean, how it actually works. Almost no one can. And we're past the point of even getting to the base because it's evolved so quickly past what original cell technology was versus a landline. Like it's highly complex, but we know how to use it. Right, and that's all that matters to us, and that's actually what HPPRNA is really.
It's simply,
I don't care.
Exactly.
I don't care if you can tell me all of this stuff. I want you to be able to use it. But understanding some of the big picture concepts are really important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So let's go back to Bayes and Bayesian thinking, and let's talk briefly about how it impacts your life every day. So I'll give you a fail in Bayesian thinking. Every single year that I've been alive, I've done an article or a report or talked about confined space entry death, where methane gas has built up and the farmer goes down to clear out the vent. He dies, then his son, then his wife, and the whole family is dead. Every year. Okay, that happens. Every year during graduation, I do a story about a car full of kids that go out and they're not harming anybody, but the car hits a tree and rolls over and does it. So Bayesian thinking is a form of high-speed hypothesis testing that says when certain pre-event indications coalesce, I have to update what I thought was going on. The kids are just going to a party. They're just going to go out for a drive. Maybe it's methane gas. Maybe I don't see it. It's colorless and odorless. And therefore, that changes the likely interaction with the environment, right? And so the adjustment of expectations is huge. So what do I mean by that? Everybody that's a cop that's listening to this, everybody that's HR, or if you're a teacher or administrator at a school, you saw a behavior change. And it was profound and it was fundamental. And all of a sudden you said, well, maybe it's just because it's Valentine's Day or whatever else. And you didn't account for it. And then you saw another thing with the same person or situation or environment or financial. It doesn't matter what the baseline is. And you didn't account for it. And then all of a sudden, here was this failure. Something went catastrophically wrong. That dysfunction showed itself. And then we looked back and we said, you know what? Every one of those things was present. I just didn't account for them. So that predictive analysis to update your probabilities based on the new and incoming evidence is Bayes. That's the root of Bayesian thinking. But it's also probability theory. And the beauty is it's also game theory. So each one of these is intrinsically connected to how you process information. And if you fail to see how the breadcrumbs coalesce, if If you fail to see that gosh damn cottage in the wood with the lady with the cauldron going, come in, have some candy, then you're going to die. And I know we make that oversimplified, Brian, but we do it for a reason. So you go, hey, I know what he's talking about.
And with there's a thing to add in here with all of this is that there's a few things. One, statistics, probability theory, even Bayes theory, like this is the most, I guess, the most newly defined parts of math, meaning math's been around forever. It's just existed, and then humans kind of understand it as time progresses, right? But when you get, the reason why it's important to understand some of this stuff, at least at a theoretical level, and big picture level, is it's one thing I always say in class, like humans, we don't intuitively understand probability. We really don't. Like, we intuitively understand physics. If you never got taught anything about physics, you still understand what gravity is. You still understand what force equals mass times acceleration means, right? You implicitly understand that because it governs the way you go through the world, right? Where you
locomotion, balance, everything. Yes.
But with this stuff, it's not. This is not an intuitive way of looking at things, because the intuitive way of looking at things is simple, it's survival based, and it's what I know in front of me. And sort of the reason why Bayes' theorem is so powerful too, because it's a little bit different in a sense of probability theory. That probability theory is there's a lot of rigor, it's very mathematical based, and it's a lot of axioms, right? Whereas Bayes' theorem kind of allows for more subjective observations to be put in, right? Meaning you have different experiences than I do, so you can use this kind of model, and you might get a more robust or different answer than me, and we can both be right in a sense of what we think it is, but maybe yours is more right than mine. You know what I mean? You get what I'm saying?
Right, but I can also use that same tool, those three tools, to transfer my knowledge and experience to you. And I do that by playing a game. So what is a practical application scenario? It's a game. There are players on both sides. There's an outcome that we think is likely, and people have to use strategies to negotiate the rules that we put into place. Okay, don't look now. Now watch. This is a day in the life. Those type of elements that we put into it. And let's go back to how long this has been important. Miyamoto Musashi says you win or lose before ever drawing your sword. Musashi beat people with a bow oar. Musashi beat the best samurais with the sheath from his gosh damn katana, right?
If you've read Sun Tzu, then that's Bayes' theorem.
Exactly.
Everything he says.
So,
you know what I mean?
so let's talk about that. So why is there such an impetus in now that the curiosity and the training and everybody that we listen to that's putting out great stuff? There's nothing that somebody's putting out that's wrong. But its locus is on motor control. Why? Because we understand motor control. Yes. We understand sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Understand it.
Exactly. But the problem with when we're talking about cognition is we don't completely fully understand the brain. We don't understand all the corticals. We don't understand even what sections of the brain are responsible. So it's mysterious, but it's not. Because if you look at science, if you look at nature, how does nature warn us about winter? It gives us fall. How does winter or nature warn us about the time to plant? It brings us spring. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So it forces us to learn by outside experimentation, and the more times that we go through those, the hypothesis testing, the better we learn. And so Bayesian thinking is hypothesis testing. So I'm in this pursuit, but this guy's taking way too many chances. So what are my possibilities? He's drunk. Okay, but he's holding it together pretty good. Maybe it's drugs on board. Okay, but maybe he's got a hostage, and maybe it's this. Now what happens is those few decisions become crystal clear on what might be going on.
And you're talking about it right there in the moment, but I also have in that specific example historical precedent. What happens the longer that pursuit goes on? Does it get better? Do the outcomes, do the potentially good outcomes increase or decrease over time? Because what historical precedent says is that it gets worse. The longer that goes on, the more likely this is not going to go well, right?
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
That informs the decision making, and that's a perfect example of how right there in the moment I'm constantly updating my hypothesis.
Of
So
course.
what we're talking about is trying to be more aware, or you would say mindful, of this
Yep. Yeah.
process, so that I can actually get better at it. And that's sort of the way these things coalesce of game theory and Bayesian or
Yep.
Bayesian thinking and
Yeah, and you
ETPRNA.
know that I call it Bayesian only based on the fact
I
that's the
think
way I
you
was
can,
trained and
yeah,
taught, and
you can use either
so
one. I think it's one of
G-Rad
those.
and
It doesn't
Amanda
matter.
Miller, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I
it's Jared.
respond to the way that I'm trained, and Brian,
But
I think your point is so important. I want to make sure that you clearly make it.
yeah, no, and when these things, the reason why we're talking about all these together, I
Yep.
think really, is what we're constantly trying to do, especially in complex situations. Now, not just complex situations. Now, add in that there's potential danger involved in that complexity, because, like, a market system or figuring out what you want to do in life can be a complex situation, meaning there's a number of inter and intra-dependent factors that affect
Yeah,
the
of
outcome,
course.
and you don't control them all, right? That's the whole
Right.
thing. Hey, the bad guy gets a vote too. You know what I mean? They get a say in what's going on in the situation too. And you don't get to how much influence you have over that is finite. But what we're talking about is balancing the knowns and unknowns in every interaction, in every
Yep.
human interaction, in every way, every situation you go into. So we've been talking about it from real situations, from training situations, and just cognitively how we think as humans.
Yep.
And you kept saying hypothesis testing,
Yep.
and that's the best way to do it, and that's what games do as well, right?
Yep.
So if that the football game, whether college, NFL, whatever, when they're going up against their opponent, they've studied their opponent, they've studied what they do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then I have to compare that against my team's strength and weaknesses and how I'm going to play against that, and really play to my strengths and try to eliminate them from exploiting my weaknesses. And then there's a little bit of randomness in there. If that
Yes.
temperature all of a sudden drops 30 degrees that day, and maybe my team is more used to playing in warmer climate,
Right.
the rain on the field, there's an injury right before the game where someone who's a top player gets pulled out and they have to sit that game out. Oh, that's where that stuff really starts to affect it. But it still comes down to, if at a basic level, is if I get good at identifying knowns and unknowns. And so the knowns, that's just understanding and recognizing different patterns,
Yep.
established behaviors, environmental cues, everything that we talk about. And I want to increase as much as what I know about a situation to reduce the uncertainty. So I don't
Yep.
want to throw in there anything, and then I can compare that to what don't I know, right? And
That's
now
the
I
question.
have the comparative baseline.
The question that you have to ask yourself, and this is Bayesian as well to update, is what am I missing here? Okay, this guy's driving like I've never seen anybody drive before. This person's fighting harder than I've ever seen anybody. This person, no matter what I'm telling them, they want to jump off that bridge or hide that evidence or do whatever else. What am I missing? There's something here. There's an environmental, there's a piece of information, there's a fact that I'm overlooking. And so how can I reassess that in real time while this is going on? And the fact of the matter is, because of your occupation, sometimes you can't. Like there's this video that's circulating now with this huge female having a breakdown. It seems mental breakdown behind a door. The guy's trying to negotiate, and all of a sudden she comes out and she's 6'5" and coming at him and slashing and doing a knife. Okay, look, that's the Jack in the Box. We try to reduce the Jack in the Box every time that we do the training. But guess what? Because there's a spectrum of potential possibilities, that's always a possibility. But if you only train for that, how is that affecting your de-escalation technique or the use of cover or all the other things that are infinitely important as well? So if you just look at that and go, yeah, but that can happen, then we're right back to the theorem that you posited at the very beginning of this. Well, anything
Right.
could happen. No, that's one of the things that could happen. So yes, I need to be ready for that. But you know what? Every single day there's encounters exactly like that don't end in a fatal shooting. What we've done is we've upended the apple cart, and we've only taken a look at those things because they're fun and they get clicks and people want to know them. The fatal stuff. You see what I'm trying to say? And the more that you see that limits your options too, because that creates a what, Brian? A mindset.
Yeah, and we don't implicitly, recognize these things when they're laid out in front of us. It's
Exactly.
dude, this is not a big deal. Look, yeah, you rolled through a stop sign, but like that's not, it's not the end of the world. It's just there's a school here, and I want to maybe talk to you about it. But you're
Sure.
going this way. It's the same thing with the insurgent, right? When I'm like, hey, did you get that stuff done for your math assignment or whatever? And then all of a sudden she goes off the top rails. I told you it is. And I'm like, well, this is this is not a typical response. There's clearly
Exactly.
something else going on, and there's some other thing that she has on her mind versus the question that I asked. And that dissonance, that disconnect there means,
Yep.
okay, there's something else here that I need to investigate or get some time and distance and come back to that and find out what else is going on. But that's the thing. It's not just the, well, that's weird, or hey, don't talk to me like that, or what are you doing? It's
Right.
there has to be that instant recognition of, I'm missing a piece of information that's critical right now. So
Right.
I may need to get some time and distance right now and figure out what that is before I make my next decision. And
Of
that's
course.
the point where we don't, but we don't do
Yes.
that in those.
We
Don't
don't.
take the non-standard observations in general as humans.
Those are most likely the marginal information, the space between the words and the paragraph that you're reading are as important as the words that you're reading. And we don't do that. We don't do that holistic approach. Again, back to Hoberman and why that Hoberman sphere is so important, because we got to make that problem a 360. We got to take a look at that. And when we talk about predictive analysis, we're talking about being able to recognize patterns that would tend to show a reasonable person that a thing's going to turn into a shit sandwich or things are going well. And Bayes tells us to constantly update that. And guess what? If you're in high risk encounter after high risk encounter and it's unknowns, traffic stops are an unknown, domestics are an unknown, suicidal subject an unknown, medical, mental, all of these are unknowns. You've got to be able to make a fast, intelligent, informed decision that's on an unpredictable set of circumstances, and it has to be legal, moral, and ethical. So where are you going to do that? On the street? Are you going to do that on the street? No, you do that in a game. And the more that you do that in a game, and the more that you start at the academy when you're a kid, and it matures during your FTO, and when you're old, now you're the graybeard street vet, and you reinforce those, Brian. Now that becomes a way of life, and habits are hard to break. Habit over mindset any day. I mean that. You know me.
Yeah, and so let's so for the purposes of this discussion, then let's talk about knowns, because my argument is, especially like you're giving these law enforcement examples, and I tell this every course we go to or every time I've trained or worked with whatever. I mean, that was even the first time when I mean, because obviously I had a military, tactical, government contracting background, and then started working with law enforcement as well, right? And I'm like, my thing was, holy shit, these folks know more than they realize. Like your knowns are so, you gather so much tacit knowledge and experience, and that's anyone with any like subject matter expertise in anything, right? I don't care if you're a pilot, I don't care if you've been doing HR your whole life, I don't care,
lawn maintenance, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Know so much more, and those get taught when you get into the science of like intuitive decision making and subject matter expertise, right? That's all there. That's those intuitive decisions that people make are based on their selected priors, based on those really good cognition biases that they've developed through experience. But I, rather than because this goes into the argument of people like, well, what do I need to look for and what do I need to do? And it's like, no. Focus on vanilla. You even said it, the margins in the paragraph, the piece of paper it's written on, the title of the book, the name of this chapter, like
the dust on the spine of the book and where it's at on the shelf in which room. You're exactly right. Those all are interesting.
You can pull those out, right? I can contextualize my knowns of my past experiences to carry me forward, right? So rather than learning the lesson of, okay, if I ever run into that situation again, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to go to this right away, or next time I go to a call and I see that same, a woman in a mental health episode doing something, I know I'm going to have to kill her. It's like, no, hang on. Like,
wait a minute.
That's not what we mean. And I'm oversimplifying it in a sense. People go, well, yeah, that's not really what happens. And I'm saying, yes, it is what happens. That's actually what happens, is we don't learn those lessons because I don't unpack my knowns. And so the better I get at articulating all of my past experiences and what occurred and the decisions that went into it. So, meaning I'm getting this from taking everything we're talking about, and rather than trying to say, all right, I'm going to go out today and I'm going to use Bayes' theorem, I'm going to use probability or game theory. So I should look at everything as a game. It's like, well, hang on. Before we get to that,
Yeah.
go back to your own personal experiences in your life. Now I can start to pull apart who the players were. What were the conditions that were set? What
Exactly.
conditions did I set
Where were the rules?
unintentionally?
Yep.
What did I unintentionally put myself in a position of disadvantage and go, holy
Yep.
shit, what were the mistakes I made? What were those indicators that I should have recognized earlier and been able to
Exactly.
draw a reasonable conclusion? Because I went through it and I went, damn it, I knew that was going to happen. So
Yep.
that
So
allows me that faster and better intervention strategy because I'm seeing things sooner. The recognition happens faster.
So spot on, and that's such an important detail. Again, folks, mark this part and go back and listen to it again. What Brian just told you is that when we talk about knowns and unknowns, we have a known where there's your definition, a high likelihood that it's going to occur based on the artifacts and evidence that I'm witnessing, and you have an unknown where there's a low likelihood. Okay, which means that if it's a low likelihood and it comes to surface, it's going to come out like a jack in the box, and you're going to have to respond to it rather than being prepared for it. So the game is to give yourself enough time and distance to balance high and low likelihood, and then the likelihood goes into most likely course of action or most deadly course of action, dangerous course of action. If you can do that for your entire life, then you're going to be fine. Like you can't lose weight with those Zempic and pills and not manage your diet and your workout. That's unsustainable. So what you have to do is you have to say, I can't just get through my police career learning how to use my gun and my baton and my less than lethal. A lot of what you do, and this is, Brian, you'll remember this argument. I think it was 2006 in the fall when we were all at the back of the tomato cannery that became the IIT. Well, yeah, but you know what? It was one of you. You know what I'm trying to say? It was one of you. And we were having the argument, and General Amos was there, and the argument came up about, Greg, I've watched 3 back-to-back scenarios, and they've all been non-kinetic. And it's like, yes, sir. And he's like, well, I didn't pay all this effing money to watch a non-kin scenario. And it's like, yeah, but sir, it's a game. That's how your brain learns. Your brain learns just as much from watching the normal daily baseline activity that's going on, because then an anomaly becomes immediately apparent. And you know
so
what?
Obvious.
There was a gap for so long, and they goes, holy shit. And then look at all the material started coming out about non-kin village, and all that other stuff. Now, I love to say that I'm the start of everything, you know, the sun coming up and this and that, because it's my massive ego. But I'll tell you what, those arguments were going around out there, and people didn't listen. And now take a look at the time that you have in a simulator. Somebody's going to go, well, if I'm going to spend time in a simulator, it better be a gosh damn shootout. It better be the, and I better feel recoil, and I better get shot once in a while so I can put on a thing. Trust me, those things are going to happen in your own life. You'll do fine. But if you handle the mental portion, and that means overcoming uncertainty by anticipating likely outcomes. That's the game. The whole game is, which move is this person going to make next? And I anticipate 3 or 4 that I know. Then there's a couple that I don't know yet. But if I see the pattern form, then I can think that that pattern is suggestive of a likely outcome. Oh my God. I mean, that right there, that should have been a book. And not because it came from me. All I'm doing is I'm like a gosh damn sprinkle. I can only shit out what I learned. And so I just learned this stuff. Wow. You get what I'm saying? And it's what I know better than anything else. And that's why we have to reassess what we do in training. Because training on the mat, of course that's important. Training on the range, of course that's important. But if you don't have an equal or greater amount of cognitive decision making, of sense making, and of in extremis critical decision making, Brian, then when the time comes and it's you and the spotlight shines on you, you might not sing, you might not dance, you might freeze up, and that's could be a detrimental outcome. That could be a shitty day for everybody involved. Because in your line of work, the failure to act may be just as bad as you acting in the wrong manner.
Right. And you know, you're bringing up some very relevant examples and showing it from the idea of how do I sort of account for this, plan for this, get better at it.
Yep.
Because that's the whole point with all this. And to your point of, I only shit out what I learned. That's I have the same thing. Look, I can always tell people, look, I've never had an original thought or idea my entire life, but I'm
Right.
one of the few that realizes that I haven't had it. Where most
Yep.
people, that's a little bit different.
They're
But,
convinced. Yeah.
well, and that's the another point of talking about these subjects is these are problems and tales as old as time.
Yes.
These are nothing new, but we,
Yep.
as humans, what do? Well, there's got to be some technology, and yes, when whoever invented the wheel, that was revolutionary. Okay, the printing press, industrialization, the internal combustion engine. You can rattle off some things that are revolutionary, but most aren't. Like most things don't do that. Like, you don't need
Right.
some revolutionary solution or technological application. You need to go back to focusing on the knowns. Well, what do we know that's consistently worked in every situation across time?
Ageless, timeless. Come on.
So that's it's part of the so what is why we like discussing this stuff, because it's like,
Yep.
you take a step
Fascinating.
back, get some time and distance. Like, we're coming up with solutions to problems that don't exist, or we're
Right.
coming up with solutions to problems that the wrong solution because we haven't clearly defined what the problem is, and that's
Or are
that's the
so
biggest
sporadic
issue.
that they're likely never to occur.
Never
Sporadic.
gonna happen again. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Happen
that
once
goes
and
back-
let's put all our money down.
well, and that goes back to we gotta have on whenever his book comes out. I know you've seen it on LinkedIn. My cousin Pat, he deals
Yep.
with
Oh, what a high thinker, by the
he's-
way. Holy
well,
smokes.
and that's his yeah. He does kind of like a lot of this type of gaming and strategic level gaming and planning, and he has background in he's a Harvard guy, but then also some intelligence community and government work and stuff like that.
Right.
And he is a consulting firm where he does this. But that was the funny point was some of the stories from immediately following 9/11,
Yep.
where he's in with this group of people, and the generals, and they're going, okay, I mean, I'm talking like immediately following 9/11, like there's
Right.
still smoke, and they're going like, okay, we got to start thinking outside the box, we got to look at everything. What other buildings do we think they're going to hit? And it's like,
Right.
oh my god, it's like no, sir, that ship is sailed.
Yeah, the airship
it's the
has
next
crashed.
problem. But so it just reminded me of that example. But
Yeah.
we went over a lot, so I kind of want to
Yeah, we
recap
did.
some of this stuff, and what I'll do too for our Patreon subscribers, I'll kind of give you some outlines and some stuff from this that we discussed, and with some of the information, so you can always go on there. But it goes back to the beginning thing. I want to debunk this myth of anything can happen. I think
Yep.
that really has a bigger effect than we realize when people start doing
Yep.
that. And there's always, sure, a meteor strike, something random, a black swan event. But, you can go back after those things and look and go, well, here were all of the pre-event indicators.
Yep.
But because it was so rare or unique, that's a major contributing factor to
Yep.
why no one saw it coming. But most things, 99% of the things you see in life are never going to be like that. So human behavior, while complex, it follows patterns, it can be understood, and it can be anticipated, especially Greg. And this is why, I bring this in comparison to like different economic models, or when you get into this with market systems and game theory, like when the more clearly you define the context of the situation, the less potential outcomes there are. If you're looking at
And the less ambiguous it is.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, like,
exactly.
if you're trying to see where the market's going to be at in 6
Yep.
years from now with everything, that's really, really difficult to do. And I think a lot
It
of
is.
people that are good at that, a lot of that is luck and some unique intuitive or inside knowledge. And I don't even mean like at an illegal, like insider trade. I mean,
Yep.
they have a unique, insight that they don't even realize that they have, and that's why they're getting good at making those decisions. But most things, especially the clearer you define the context, the less complex it becomes. And
Exactly.
a great way to do this is what we talked about with games, and games reflect life. There's fundamental aspects of games that help us comprehend and understand strategic interactions in real life. It's all about looking at games, game theory, and decision making. Applying the game theory, it allows us to anticipate other actions, plan strategies accordingly. The Bayesian thinking that is what allows us to enhance our predictions. And what we talk about all the time in this podcast, what we do for a living, what we train, is the HBP RNA is the goal is reducing the uncertainty, reduce the ambiguity, reduce the complexity, so I can have make a more a more informed decision sooner and be more confident in my decisions, right?
Yep.
Because I have a leg to stand on. I can show my work. I can show the teacher, my work to get to the answer. And maybe even if the answer was maybe not the best answer, it's better than rolling the dice, right? I mean,
exactly.
That's the other thing is what
that's what informed means. You're going to be wrong sometime, but guess what? You're much more informed than the person that's constantly just guessing.
Because you're going to be right more than you're wrong, and when you are wrong,
exactly.
You're going to be able to know where it went wrong. And we didn't even really get into, obviously, like what does a correct decision or success look like, because that's defined a number of things. Because you're not looking for the right answer. You're looking for like the best answer given the available information that I have.
Yep.
Like
and at least know what right looks like, so I know that I was on the right path. So you're exactly right.
I would encourage everyone to kind of think about this stuff and use it in your everyday life in the most simple interactions with, family, friends, whatever, and try to become more aware or mindful, as Greg would say, of the different factors and characters that are at play and the different roles and the different rules that govern your everyday social interactions. There's things and ways that are more appropriate to say or do at a loud bar at midnight on a Friday versus the church on Sunday morning. So think about those. So Greg, I'll throw to you for sort of a
real quick one, Brian. So we talked about Bayesian theory and probability theory and game theory. And so the hardest opponents to anything are always our law enforcement subject matter experts, because you learn one way and then the walls start going and now all of a sudden you got a silo. So I tell you this, all of a sudden you got that younger copper and you just called off a pursuit and they show up at roll call and they're like, hey, this is bullshit. I drive every day. I know what's going on. I'm a street vet. I make a lot of felonies. And you look at them and you go, did you check the oil on that car today? Did you check the tire pressure on that car? Is that the car that you've driven through all of the training? When was the last time you were training? The idea is that we make decisions and we think that it's in the best interest. If we don't go back and understand Bayes and probability and game theory, then what's happening is we're riding for a fall, because we're allowing all that hubris to get up ahead of us and we're not crystal clear in our thinking. So making a better decision, and sometimes no is the right decision, is much better than getting into that roll of the dice mentality and saying, look, I can beat the house. I know I can beat the house this time, because that's dangerous thinking. So all HBPRNA is reducing uncertainty in the most austere and complex environments in a speed that you should feel comfortable with, meaning with training, you'll get faster.
Yeah. And that's the house. The house always wins, right? Physics, math, Mother Nature is always gonna win out in the that's what's gonna win, right? It's people who go, oh, we gotta save the environment. No, the environment's gonna be fine whether we're here or not.
Exactly. It has a way of fixing things.
No, it's good. Like we're the ones we need to fix.
So do governments
externally,
Brian. So do governments. So do diseases. So does everything else. So we need to look at that, and all of those follow scientific theories. So we're more interested in building your mental acumen than your speed of returning your weapon to the holster or doing a tactical reload. So if you're looking for that stuff, we're probably not your game.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, that was a lot. So we appreciate everyone listening, especially if you made it all the way to the end.
Holy smokes.
please check out our Patreon page and always reach out to us. The Human Behavior Podcast at gmail.com. More than happy to answer questions and get into stuff on here. We do that all the time for our Patreon subscribers who we do love and appreciate. And we get some good ones. We get them to come on sometime and bring their expertise as well. Yep. Shout out to Scott Kirshner from
Kirshner's fun.
Solutions. He's great. He is. And I love the name of his company because there's a lot of meaning behind it.
I believe that too.
So we thank everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. Share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it, and don't forget that training changes behavior.